Building something new is a tricky process. First, you have to pull an idea out of your mind and turn it into a sketch on paper. After that, you need to follow that paper sketch and use it to create a prototype. Well, reaching that point is already a major accomplishment, but not all of those prototypes succeed. For many reasons, technology sometimes gets dismissed or left behind after a prototype has been made or test runs have been carried out. This video is packed with incredible relics and vehicles that were left behind, like the Sinclair C5. Alright, let's start off with number 15. Abandoned Gallion. The so-called abandoned Gallion in Demey, France, is a favorite backdrop for tourists and photographers, but technically it isn't a real galleon. It was actually a pirate-themed restaurant called L'Île du Gallion, which translates to Gallion Island. Everything inside matched the theme pirate dress staff, a pirate-style menu, and guests encouraged to join in with their own costumes. For a while the novelty worked, but by the early 2000s the magic faded and the restaurant shut down. In 2008, someone attempted a revival, but instead of restoring the Gallion, they built a separate generic structure next to it. Unsurprisingly, the plan failed, and the new building was gone by 2012. No one maintained the original ship, and after years of exposure, it's starting to show heavy wear. The wooden body is marked by graffiti and weather damage. Though it was never an actual vessel, the Gallion now feels truly abandoned, its once vibrant fantasy now reduced to a decaying shell fading under layers of paint and time. Number 14. Sloth Furnace. Check the official list of National Historic Landmarks in the United States, and you'll come across a peculiar entry in Birmingham, Alabama Sloth Furnaces. For nearly a century, from 1882 to 1971, it operated as a blast furnace, producing pig iron used across the nation. Sites like these are usually dismantled once their purpose ends, but not this one. Within just 10 years of shutting down, it was awarded landmark status by the Department of the Interior. To this day, it remains the only preserved and partially restored blast furnace in the entire country open for public visits. Occasionally, it even transforms into a wildly unconventional venue for concerts. The furnaces are named after Colonel James Withers Sloss, a central figure in Birmingham's founding, but not all of its past is honorable. Before the Civil War, many workers here were black men forced into labor after being falsely imprisoned for vagrancy. It no longer smelts iron, but today it's a livelier place, hosting events like an annual Halloween fright fair. Number 13. France's abandoned sunflower pool. In the 1970s, France's government set out to boost public health by encouraging more people to swim regularly. As part of the initiative, they funded the construction of piscines tournesol known as sunflower pools. With their saucer-like shape and retractable domed roofs, these pools looked futuristic and allowed for year-round use. Designed by architect Bernard Scholler, the roof could open during summer and close tightly to retain heat in winter. Though they were advanced for their time, most have since closed down. The one shown here, located in Brittany, has stood empty for years yet remains surprisingly clean. These pools once symbolized innovation in public infrastructure. Today, some locals are campaigning to have them declared historic monuments to protect what's left. Others envision reopening them as exhibition or performance spaces. In their prime, these pools were more than just places to swim, they were centers of design and accessibility. Their fading presence is a reminder of how quickly even the most forward-thinking projects can fall into neglect. And let's see what might happen to Line City. Number 12. Moldovan bunkers. Talk of a Third World War never really disappears from headlines, and it's safe to assume that governments and military planners continue to make backup plans just in case. In fact, preparations for global conflict have been in motion for decades. Without them, these massive secret bunkers in Muldova wouldn't exist. Bunkers hardly describes them properly. The sprawling underground structure is better defined as a buried city. Western intelligence, specifically the US and Britain, knew about the construction in 1985 and gave it the code name Object 1180. The design followed classic Cold War doctrine: officials could take shelter from nuclear attacks while coordinating strikes of their own. These subterranean spaces held supply rooms, hospitals, communication hubs, and even shops, everything needed to survive underground for months or years. But when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, work on the site stopped entirely. Since then, these Cold War fortresses have remained abandoned beneath Muldova, silent monuments to a war that never came but was very much expected. Number 11. Launch Complex 34. At Florida's Cape Canaveral, several launch complexes mark milestones in space history, but Launch Complex 34 stands apart, and not for good reason. It was the site of the Apollo 1 tragedy. Though other rockets had been launched successfully from here, the Apollo 1 test in January 1967 turned fatal. Engineers had raised concerns about flammable materials inside the capsule, but their warnings went ignored. During a routine test, a spark ignited in the oxygen-rich chamber. Within 16 seconds, it was a full blaze. Astronauts Virgil Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee died with no chance of escape. NASA kept the site active for another year, but in 1968, it was shut down and mostly dismantled. Today, only the rocket cradle and fire shields remain. They've been left standing as a quiet memorial to the 3 lives lost, not as part of a successful mission, but during preparation. The complex now serves as a sobering reminder that even in science, oversight can carry a fatal cost, and you can see it for yourself. Number 10. NASA Space Shuttle Fuel Tank. Green Cove Springs, Florida may seem like an odd place to find a NASA Space Shuttle fuel tank, but there's one sitting there and it's not going anywhere soon. The massive tank is actually a full-scale replica never used in flight but built for ground testing between 1977 and 1980 at NASA's Marshall Flight Center in Alabama. It later went on display at Kennedy Space Center until 2013, when it was sold to a private collector. The plan was to move it to Keystone Heights, Florida, but transporting it became a nightmare. The tank is too large to pass under overhead power lines without shutting down entire stretches of highway. Authorities refused to allow the move, leaving the buyer with no choice but to abandon it where it stopped. Now the tank just sits there, stuck in limbo. The owner likely doesn't want it anymore, and no one else can come get it. Its size alone makes removal a logistical impossibility. Will you do that job? Number 9. Restorel Castle. Restorel Castle in Cornwall, England is far from high-tech, but its history is just as striking. Unlike most English castles that were built with square or rectangular layouts, Restorel was built in a perfect circle, surrounded by a matching circular moat. Even 1,000 years later, its unique design still stands out. The remains of the Great Hall show off enormous fireplaces and wide windows that hint at the castle's original grandeur. It was once the seat of the Earl of Cornwall, though historians debate its exact construction date. Some believe it may have been the first castle built after the Norman conquest, which could explain its unusual architecture. Over the centuries, it was occupied and abandoned multiple times, but the final desertion came during the English Civil War in the mid-1600s. Since then, it's never been rebuilt. Today, English Heritage manages the site and keeps it open to the public. What remains is still striking, a circular ruin standing firm in the Cornish countryside. What do you think about it? Let us know. Number 8. Cemetery of Anchors. For centuries, tuna fishing dominated the Algarve region of Portugal, but eventually, success led to oversaturation. Too many boats chased too few fish, and profits sank. As the trade collapsed, the fishermen moved on, but left their massive iron anchors behind. Decades later, they're still there, half buried in the sand, as if placed for effect. Locals call the area Cementicio das Ancoras, the Cemetery of Anchors. Most have remained untouched since the 1970s, scattered across the dunes like remnants of a forgotten industry. For years, residents saw them as nothing more than rusty junk and wanted them removed. But opinions changed. Over time, the anchors gained unexpected charm. Tourists now visit specifically to see them. What was once considered an eyesore has quietly transformed into an unplanned landmark. They weren't meant to be art, but they've become just that. Natural installations marking the end of an era. Stubborn, still, and slowly rusting, the anchors remain where they fell, with no signs of leaving anytime soon. Number 7. Shime Coal Mine Tower. Shime Coal Mine Tower in Japan has stood abandoned since 1964, but it recently gained attention online as the so-called perfect hideout for a zombie apocalypse. At 150 feet tall, the structure looks surreal, and its history is equally unclear. While mining began at this location back in 1889, there's conflicting information about the tower itself. Some sources claim it operated for only 2 years, from 1943 to 1945, before being shut down. Back then, it housed a giant winding mechanism used to haul coal from more than 1,400 feet underground. No other building in Japan resembles it. Though it has twin structures, one in Belgium and another in China, this one feels especially haunting. What was once designed purely for utility has become a striking example of brutalist architecture. Those who built it likely never imagined people decades later would admire it for its design. Now it stands empty, weathered, eerie, and iconic in a way no one originally intended, captured in viral photos and architectural blogs alike. Number 6. Northrop YB49. Military innovation didn't stop when World War II ended. On the contrary, American defense planners suspected another conflict was on the horizon and stayed in development mode. One striking result was the Northrop YB49, a heavy bomber built in 1947. With its flat wing-only structure and jet propulsion, it looked more like science fiction than anything else in the sky. In fact, the unusual silhouette may even explain the wave of UFO sightings reported during its testing. The YB49 was built for the U.S. Air Force and delivered solid results in trial flights. But the piston-engine Convair B-36 was already in the pipeline, and military leadership chose the safer bet. While the YB-49 was shelved, its core concepts weren't forgotten. Elements of its flying wing design resurfaced decades later, becoming the backbone of Northrop's B-2 Spirit stealth bomber in the 1990s. Though short-lived, the YB-49 wasn't a failure. It was simply too far ahead of its time, a high-potential prototype pushed aside by practicality. Number 5. High-altitude gun. The Cold War produced some of the strangest military experiments in modern history, and many were discarded before completion. One of the oddest was the massive cannon built under the High Altitude Research Project, a joint U.S.-Canadian mission to fire projectiles into the upper atmosphere. Work began in 1961 and ended in 1967, but what remains still stands in the jungle of Barbados. Engineer Gerald Bull led the project, modifying a 50 caliber naval gun into a colossal 100 caliber cannon. It became absurdly oversized and completely immobile, but it worked. The gun could launch objects up to 112 miles into the sky. The dream was to eventually use it to launch satellites or payloads into orbit at a fraction of the cost. However, the Vietnam War shifted priorities and drained resources. Funding was cut, and the project was scrapped. The rusting behemoth still lies in Barbados, a strange monument to what could have been one of the cheapest space launch technologies ever developed, but never fully realized. Number 4. Buran-21. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, many ambitious aerospace projects were abandoned, including the second Buran shuttle, officially designated Product 2.01. While the first Buran made a successful spaceflight in 1988, this second vehicle never left Earth. Built at the Tushino machine building plant, Product 2.01 was nearly complete when funding dried up in the early 1990s. With no budget and no mission, the shuttle sat idle inside the factory for over a decade. By 2004, space was needed, and it was dragged outside, left exposed on Ulitsa Shnera, not far from Shukinskaya metro station in Moscow. When photos surfaced in 2010, what remained was a decaying shell of Soviet ambition. Despite being designed to symbolize technical superiority during the Cold War, it now sits weathered and neglected. No museum claimed it, no agency restored it. Once a symbol of space race pride, Product 2.01 became just another rusting relic, abandoned not because it failed, but because no one was left to finish what it started. Number 3. Mikoyan Gorovich. Meek ein hundert thumph. The U.S. space shuttle gets most of the spotlight, but the Soviet Union had its own spaceplane ideas long before the Buran ever flew. In fact, Mikoyan Gurevich, famous for its fighter jets, nearly became the USSR's spaceflight pioneer. The Mik-105 was part of the Spiral program, a bold plan to create a craft that could fly like a jet and also reach low orbit. Development began in 1965 but paused after the Apollo moon landing. Then, in 1974, when the U.S. announced its space shuttle, the project reignited. The Mik-105 achieved subsonic flight in 1976 and flew 8 more times before funding was officially pulled in 1978. The Soviet government decided to pour all resources into the Buran instead. Now the Mik-105 prototype sits on display at the Menino Air Force Museum. Though it never reached orbit, it represented one of the earliest and most daring attempts at reusable spaceflight, a flying machine built for 2 realms but destined to stay grounded. Number 2. BV-141. As Europe inched toward war during the mid-1930s, militaries on every side began rethinking their capabilities. That drive led to some wildly experimental prototypes, among them the German Blohm and Voss BV-141 reconnaissance aircraft. You'd never mistake it for anything else. It was one of the rare planes in history built with an asymmetrical design. Despite its odd appearance, performance tests were positive. The BV-141 flew well, but mass production never came. 2 factors held it back. First, the ideal engine became scarce, creating supply problems. Second, the Focke-Wulf FW-189 came along and proved just as capable without the design complexity. In total, 3 test models were built, followed by 2 production batches of 5. Another 12 units were greenlit, but production didn't go much further. Even with that limited output, not a single example of the BV-141 has survived, and it's pretty unfortunate. Number 1. Cementicio Jafanti. Cementicio Jafanti is a grand name for what was once a grand structure. This towering concrete factory didn't just produce cement, it created the very material used in constructing Milan's famous Central Station. Named after its founder Giacinto Jafanti, the plant opened in Albino in 1886. It later passed to his children, who sold it to Italcementi in 1921. Under their management, it was upgraded to manufacture artificial cement, making it the first plant of its kind in Italy. During its most productive period in the 1930s, it churned out around 170 tons of cement each year. However, the 1966 economic crisis signaled the beginning of the end. Though production officially ended in 1976, grinding operations continued until 2005. Since then, this once thriving factory with over a century of history has stood abandoned. Most of the photographs seen today were taken during an urban exploration project in 2010 and might be the last, as the site was officially marked for demolition in late 2019. If you've enjoyed this video, be sure to like it, share it, and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in with us, and we'll see you soon.